When it comes to speedrunning, you usually think of someone playing games, but what about making games? For speedy game dev, game jams come to mind, but usually those are more about limiting scope rather than practicing pure speed. If someone can beat Elden Ring, a game that can take a normal person anywhere from 40 to 100 hours to complete, in only an hour, then surely I can apply the same strategies to making games. If you look at any indie game dev story, they will all mention how many years it took them to get a product on the market. And that's fine for them, but for me it's just unacceptable. I want to release a game now! And you might be thinking I'm just impatient. Making games is not the same as playing games. You can't rush art, or my game is going to be buggy if I rush it, or blah blah blah. But that's not what this is about. I'm not trying to cut corners on quality, rather it's about directed practice. And a clickbait YouTube title. This is about honing my skills in a way so that I'm wasting less time getting the ideas out of my head and onto the screen. If you've ever watched a speedrunner, you'll notice they split their games up into segments, they track individually and specifically practice certain areas over and over again they might be slower in. So my plan is to record myself coding a specific mechanic into a game, and try to use speedrunner strats to analyze where I need to improve. For my starting point, I set up a simplified version of a game I made for a recent game jam, so that my timing is consistent. What I have here is a player with some basic movement and animations. I wanted to simulate a working game dev environment where I already have some code lying around, and potentially copy from, but I cannot copy code from outside the project otherwise. I've also already done the art and animation and sound work ahead of time, although speedrunning those pieces would also be good practice in a different capacity. As for the mechanic I'm implementing, it is the mechanic where my player is able to place a trap in the ground to trap these horrifying monsters so they stop chasing her. The player can also pick this trap back up and place it elsewhere on the map. So those are the basic requirements. There is also some stuff about UI work and error sounds which are also needed. It's a very simple mechanic that shouldn't be too hard to understand. In order to save time, I will not be handling the monster logic, so this won't be fully functional. But I think this is a good amount of work that's representative of what it takes to implement a basic mechanic in a game. So to get started, I guess I should just time myself and record and see how long it takes and start planning out more efficient routes. At first, it felt a little awkward since I've never done a speedrun before, and I could feel the pressure, but I eventually got used to it. The splits I'm using are kind of arbitrary. I'm just trying to code everything at once, at first, and then leave the testing for later. But the first two splits actually work out kind of nicely, and I get to coding the player input around the 24-minute mark. But soon after this, the run goes kind of wrong. This is because I actually changed up how I was coding the placement mechanic. In the original game jam, I had set up these placement nodes on the map, and when the player presses the trap key, it places the trap on whatever placement node they are standing on. And it saves the ID of the node in a variable in order to remember where your trap was placed, so you can pick it up again. It's a terrible method, but it's just what I came up with during the jam. Instead, I am now trying to make it so the player can place anywhere as long as there are no obstacles in the way. Of course, because I was in a rush, I forgot that Godot really doesn't like you enabling and disabling colliders through code. This is why I usually do this kind of thing in a timed animation or something. So I kept trying to work around that bug and got stuck working on this for about an hour, before I gave up and just trashed the run. There's an important lesson here in that you can't really speedrun something you are doing for the first time. Maybe if you had lots of experience implementing similar mechanics, you could easily come up with something like that on the spot. But I have not yet built up that library of mental knowledge. The same thing goes for figuring out unexpected bugs. Those will always take up an undefined amount of time if you had not seen them before, sometimes regardless of experience. Anyway, this is normally when I would take a break and let my brain reset, so I did that. And I didn't time that. I'm not speedrunning breakaway time, and optimizing break time is a whole other can of worms that I don't want to get into. Now, before I started my second run, I went ahead and finished coding the placement mechanic so that it actually works. I then erased all my progress by reverting my Git repo, so it's time to start again. This time around, my first two splits were faster, and I was actually able to finish the run in under an hour. Honestly, this could be a lot faster since I was getting caught up on minor issues that I really shouldn't be getting caught up on. So, third time's the charm. This one should be a good baseline before we go looking for more improvements. Finally, now that I know what I'm doing, it took around 30 minutes. Which isn't too bad, but now we need to figure out how to push our limits. Now, rewatching those clips, this is where I see it's possible to save time. First of all, I'm really slow and clumsy at just navigating the UI, and my typing speed is pretty slow as well. So either learning keyboard shortcuts for Godot or just practicing the basic flow a bit would help a lot there. Out of the box, it's not possible to get away from the mouse entirely, but ideally I'd be one of those Chad Linux users out there that never has their hands leave the keyboard. As for code reuse and complexity, this is just having a standard library of functions that I can reuse across the project, as well as keeping code modular so that I'm not constantly scrolling back and forth in huge files giving myself mental fatigue. However, bringing those improvements into the speedrun would be cheating, since it would involve modifying the initial conditions of the run. But it's worth keeping in mind for bigger projects outside this video. So my only option is to just practice typing keyboard shortcuts and also just get good with Godot. For keyboard shortcuts, you can get pretty far by just studying the settings menu, though you will find your options limited since there isn't a good way to grab focus on different parts of the editor. Tabbing through things sometimes works, but you can't tab to everything, and it depends on what you have focus on. For example, this editor description field, if your focus gets here, you can't leave it without the mouse. You can turn this field off, but it's just an example. One way around this would be to make my own keyboard shortcuts with auto hotkey or something, though it'd be a lot of work, and it's pretty much guaranteed to break in future versions of Godot. There's also the classic way of improving your code, by just doing more code. So after that 30-minute run, I did another game jam, where I expanded on my original game. So, with the training montage now over, let's try this one last time. Since I had basically memorized the necessary code at this point, along with just being a bit faster moving around in the UI, I get through the first 2 splits much faster, saving about 7 minutes. I also used the bookmark function in the text editor to quickly navigate around my player code, since that script is a bit longer. So I ended up saving another few minutes with the placement logic. I could have actually finished this in less than 20 minutes if I didn't stumble in a few places towards the end. But still, that was a 30% improvement over my previous personal best, so I call this a win. So was this exercise useful? For sure it was. I am faster at Godot now, but you don't necessarily have to practice this way. It was kind of stressful being on a timer, and I actually procrastinated on making this video quite a bit because of that. And whenever I make games, it's pretty much a new challenge with every step. So speedrunning a specific mechanic isn't necessarily representative of the whole process. A game jam is probably still the best way to just get exposure to every part of game dev. But you should still take some time to better learn your toolset in between jams. Any kind of practice is beneficial, but if you take the time to consider how efficient your practice is, you can greatly accelerate your rate of mastery. Thanks for watching to the end. If you're interested in the game I've been showing off, I will be posting more devlogs about it in the future. We are planning on releasing it as a full product at some point. Subscribe if you want to see more.